And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Maite.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here and to see so many familiar faces. Thank you for being here. So we have a cozy group today, a comforting group today. So what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about comfort food, the history of mac and cheese, and then we will make a delicious pot of mac and cheese. How many of you are cooking today? I see some kitchens, so maybe about half of you. And some of you maybe will cook. Hey, Adriana, we'll cook later. Excellent. So we're gonna make, there's one thing that I forgot to write on the recipe, but it's not a big deal. It's not like you have to like run out and buy any other equipment or material. But before I really get started, so just in case you want to do this, there are two ways to make mac and cheese. Well, there are many, many different ways to make mac and cheese, but there's the really sort of cheesy, a little bit more liquid mac and cheese, and then there's the baked mac and cheese. So there's those two different ways to do that. The baked mac and cheese is the more sort of traditional historic mac and cheese, which is basically you put it, rather than what we're doing, just making it, adding, my mouth is watering just thinking about the noodles going into this cheese. There's that's the more sort of liquidy, cheesy version. And then there's the other version that you put in a baking dish, save a little bit of the cheese, put that cheese on top, and bake it for 15 minutes. So if you prefer the second one, the latter one, that's still really cheesy, but a little more dense, go ahead and grab a baking dish and preheat your oven to 325. So if you prefer that one, you could do that, or you could just split it in half and do a little one in the oven and a little one just like this, like the recipe that I sent, if you want to taste both, versions. That's totally up to you. So I just thought I'd throw that out there in case you get to the end and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't my mac and cheese. So there's the more liquidy version and then the denser version that's baked. So I'll give everybody a moment. I see some of you discussing, Riz and Rowan are discussing, what do we do? Which one do we like? So I see Elise pulled out a baking dish. Yeah, so it's basically one or the other. They're both delicious. They're just a little bit different. So I'll just give you a moment to grab a baking dish if you're going to do that, and then I'll just get started. Hey, Karen. So we thought about this when Fatima reached out to me a few months ago. We thought, oh, comfort food, it's been rough. 2020, beginning of 2021, we're starting to see the light. There's hope ahead. There's always hope, but there's even more hope ahead. But it's like we've been home and it's kind of eating things that feel, comforting. So what does that mean to you? I wonder. I mean, because we're making mac and cheese, which is the typical American comfort food. But when I think of comfort food, it's not the first thing that comes to my mind. There are many other things that I love macaroni and cheese. I love everything cheese. But I wonder what is the first thing that you think of when you think of comfort food? If you want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, whichever you prefer. I'm just curious not just curious, I'm interested.
For me, it's hot chocolate, Mexican hot chocolate. That's what, yeah.
I'm there with you. Anybody else?
Oh, we have one in the chat box from Katie. It says, my mom and stepdad's spaghetti and meatballs.
Oh,
sounds delicious.
Delicious.
For me, it's fideo, sopa de fideo.
So the Mexican version of the mac and cheese-ish. Fideo, totally.
Oh, Barbara's telling us a classic chocolate chip cookies. I agree, yes.
Yeah.
Straight out of the oven.
Straight out of the oven, warm. Crispy or chewy?
Ooh, I like crispy around the edges and chewier in the center. Adriana's saying yes with cookies and milk, yes.
Cookies and milk. Can't disagree. All of those things sound incredible.
Anything chocolate is comfort food.
Anything with chocolate. Anybody else?
Chinese
I
soup.
like a minestrone soup.
Minestrone soup. Hearty, warm.
And I heard Chinese soup there too.
Chinese soup. Sounds like soup, right? Like Chinese soup, minestrone soup, spaghetti, chocolate, hot chocolate, cookies. It's usually carby, something that's carby or sweet. That's usually the comfort food. For me, it's fried plantains. I go crazy with fried plantains. That's like my ultimate comfort food. I also love mole, just a really good, mole. And if you give me a can of condensed milk, that's it. I'm heaven. So it's like a little bit greasy and sweet, just kind of all of it. But comfort food is quite interesting because it has so many associations. And it's so personal. It's different for every single person. I mean, there definitely are similarities, whether it's, a minestrone soup or a Chinese, soup or your mom's chicken soup, whatever it is, it's usually, it can be something warm. It can be just ice cream. Like every romantic comedy, the comfort food is the pint of ice cream, right? Straight from the container. So it can be, it's so personal and it has so many different associations. And it's as old as time, right? I mean, the idea of comfort food is something that goes on, that has always existed. The definition of comfort food, the term comfort food, doesn't appear in the dictionary until 1997. So really not that long ago is the first time that we see the term in the Oxford Encyclopedic Dictionary. And they describe it as food that makes you feel better, often because it contains a lot of sugar or because it reminds you of home. So this whole idea of, home, it's also some definitions associated with childhood. And I feel like these past year, it's like, oh, I've been feeling so homesick, even though I'm home, but homesick for my childhood, for my childhood home. And it's that, there's just certain foods like the fried plantains. But it's typically when somebody feels sad or lonely, especially when adults feel sad or lonely, that's where they go to these foods that somehow reminded them of home, of a particular moment. Maybe it's their mom's chicken soup, sort of that kind of food that just makes you feel cozy and comforting. It's like this food that kind of feels like a warm hug. That's basically what the term, loosely the term of comfort food. Again, it's a term that goes, a concept that has existed, forever, and it could be something different for every single person. But mac and cheese is really it's interesting that nobody said macaroni and cheese. There's spaghetti and meatballs, which is similar. Nobody said mac and cheese. But it is really like but a few people said pasta, noodles. It is really the quintessential American comfort food. And it's funny because America is so many different things. But this sort of the Kraft blue box, that to me reminds me of summers. It was in the summer when my mom would buy things like processed things like that, and we were allowed to eat that. So it reminds me of summertime. But mac and cheese has a really, really, really ancient and interesting, history. And it goes back, this whole idea of, pasta itself goes back to about 3500 BC to ancient China. Pasta, and they were making pasta with wheat, making pasta with rice, sort of different types of pasta. Different than what we're using today, but still this whole idea of making a dry pasta with hard wheat. It goes back millennia. But the pasta the dried pasta that we're familiar with today sort of spread all the way to the Middle East. And we start seeing a type of dry pasta again that's similar to what we have today. in the Middle East around the 7th century. So not Italy first, in the Middle East. And then from the Middle East, it spread to Sicily with the Arabs. And Sicily is the granary of the entire Mediterranean and still is today, but has been for centuries. So they started making pasta, dried pasta in Sicily around the 7th century. From there, it spread to Spain and then to the rest of Europe, and eventually made its way to the US in colonial America. So it has this ancient, ancient history. And pasta is, if you use it, it's a dry, hard durum wheat. It's a different pasta than you would use to make bread, to bake bread, because it's hard. You could really pound it, you could dry it, and you could cut it into strips, cut it into different shapes, whatever it is that you're doing, and it doesn't break. And it's sometimes it does break, but it's hard, and will last a really, really, really long time. So it's kind of the perfect food in a way. But from Sicily, it spread to Spain, and then it made its way through Europe and became very, very popular in Italy. But the word macaroni, for centuries, the term macaroni is just a generic term for pasta or noodles. It's the same. It's basically one and the same. It didn't really we call it macaroni, this little tiny, these little elbow shapes. We call it macaroni in the US, but this shape in Italy is called gomita, which means little elbows. So it's very different. But the term is essentially, it's just a generic term for pasta. But we start seeing it, just to bring it to the US. We start seeing it in the English language in cookbooks dating all the way back to the 14th century. So there's this really interesting cookbook called The Form of Curry. That's an early British cookbook. It was printed in 1500, but it's from a 14th century manuscript. And it's the first time that we see in English a recipe for macaroni and cheese. They call it macros. So very different, but it's macros. It's basically macro is boiled pasta in water with grated cheese and butter. It's mac and cheese. It's basically what it is. It's pasta with cheese and butter. So it's the first time we actually see it in a cookbook. So these ideas of sort of macaroni with butter and cheese, because the early colonists in the US were British, they're bringing these recipes and these ideas, with them. We start seeing it appear in early American cookbooks that were brought from England in the 18th century. So jumping forward a few centuries. But let me go back a minute. Anyhow, recipes for macaroni and cheese were coming to the US, and it was sort of intriguing. It was Italian, well, in this case, it's British, but it had been coming from Italy. But the most famous person to actually serve macaroni and cheese in the US was Thomas Jefferson. Not the first person to make it, not the first person to serve it, but the first person to really make it sort of desirable and really, known. He had been living in France in the years before the French Revolution and traveled around Italy and actually ended up buying a pasta maker when he was in Naples. So he sent this pasta maker over with him when he came back to the US. He bought a giant wheel of Parmesan cheese also when he was living in Italy. Traveling through Italy. And he came back from Europe with a bunch of recipes written in his hand, among them a recipe for macaroni. So how to make, not the dry macaroni, just fresh pasta. In 1802, at a dinner party at the White House, he served macaroni and cheese. It was the baked macaroni and cheese that I was talking about at the beginning. And there are people this person that was at the party, I dined at the president's house. Dinner was not as elegant as when I dined before. Among other dishes, there was a pie called macaroni, which appeared to be a rich crust filled with onions or shallots, which tasted very strong and not agreeable. I was told that it was an Italian dish, and it wasn't onions, it was flour and butter. So this is how they're describing it. But still, it was sort of intriguing. And it's interesting that the very first pasta factory in the US, the first pasta factories in the US were actually not by Italians, but by French chefs that had fled the revolution, the French Revolution, and moved to the US. So there was one man, Louis Frazan was his name, in 1802, the same year as this dinner party, he was actually making macaroni, dried macaroni in Philadelphia. It was something that was consumed by the upper classes. It was this dried pasta, and you would buy cheese, and it was kind of fancy. Thomas Jefferson served it, even though his guests didn't think it was that elegant. But most pasta, this man, his shop was probably short-lived. Most pasta was actually imported from Sicily via London. So it had made this sort of long journey to get to either Philadelphia, or there are other shops in Trenton, New Jersey, or in Richmond, Virginia. So these were actually being imported. And then it eventually became, quite popular, this whole idea of just macaroni and cheese. It became something that it slowly started to become something that was much more accessible, much more, common. So over the centuries, and then we get to the mac and cheese. Then we get to sort of the craft, macaroni and cheese that we're so familiar with today. This kind of dates to a little bit after the Depression. Oh, but wait, one more cookbook that I wanted to share, which made it a little bit more popular or known. This is called The Virginia Housewife, or Methodical Cook. And this was published in 1824. This is the first cookbook published in the US. That was not a copy of a British cookbook or a British cookbook published in the US, but sort of still following a British cookbook. This was the first full-on, written by an American recipes, published in the US, 1824. She was related by marriage to Thomas Jefferson. And this book was the most popular gift for brides for decades. So the Virginia housewife has a recipe for macaroni. So by 1824, every housewife in the US had a copy of this cookbook and was making macaroni and cheese at home. So it's exactly the same as this. Boil as much macaroni as will fill your dish. Add milk, add some cheese and butter, and bake it. So it's basically exactly the same thing. It doesn't give you much more. You just kind of figure out as much pasta as it fits. You just kind of figure it out. But then it just became kind of common. And it is this, you could say it's cheese and pasta, it's very Italian, but with a history that goes back to the Middle East and then further back to China. And then we see the little blue box, and then we see dehydrated cheese. That it becomes like such a thing. Already we have dried pasta that lasts forever. So then they start making dehydrated cheese, which you can, if you have a dehydrator, you could stick a cheese in there and it becomes cheese powder. On a commercial scale, you turn the cheese to liquid and then you dry that and then add all sorts of, preservatives, or this is how they do it on a massive, scale. It's what Cheetos have, what Doritos have, what leaves your fingers, yellow. But it's easy, right? It's easy. So in 1937 is the first time that we actually see the blue box. Actually, it wasn't blue originally. It was a yellow box of the Kraft macaroni and cheese. So it's the first time that we see it out there. It's all about convenience foods. And by the Second World War, women are out, working, and there's no money, there's no food. So it's all about what's quick, what's easy, what's cheap. So this is when this macaroni and cheese box that we know really became super popular. So just to give you a sense, of what it costs. So because it has cheese or a cheese powder, it was considered a meat meal substitute. So it was okay to eat this instead of meat when they were rationing meats. So 2 boxes of the cheese could be purchased for 1 ration stamp, and a meal, and they advertise it as a meal for 4 in 9 minutes for 19 cents. This was in 1937 when it first came out. During the Second World War, you could get 2 for 1 ration stamp. Eventually, they swapped the yellow box for the blue as an advertising, just as an advertising method, you know, so that kids would just ask for the blue box. And it is still there's so many others like Annie's Organics, and there's so many other mac and cheeses. You know, Velveeta came up with one in the 80s, but the Kraft macaroni and cheese blue box is to this day the most popular mac and cheese still in the entire country. They remove some of the preservatives and some of the yellow dyes in the cheese, but to this day, it is the most popular mac and cheese, and really has become the sort of ultimate comfort food in the country, in the US. Does anyone have any questions before we start making the mac and cheese? This deliciousness. Hey, Amanda, I just saw you. Any questions or comments, or should we just jump in? I guess we'll just jump in. I don't. So for those of you that missed it at the very, very beginning, I'm going to make a kind of a looser version of the mac and cheese. If you like the baked, more dense mac and cheese, pull out a baking dish and preheat your oven to 325. If you like more of a pudding that you can cut into squares. Otherwise, we'll just do the one that I'm doing. So I have a pot over here just with water. I'm gonna do a few different things at the same time. I have a pot of salted water that I'm just gonna heat up. Oops. And I'll add my pound of macaroni. I have no business making an entire pound of macaroni, but that's okay. I will give to neighbors. So I'm gonna heat that up. And then right over here, I have 4 cups of milk, just regular whole milk. And I'm gonna add 1 bay leaf to it, just to give it a little flavor. I love the earthiness of a bay leaf. So I'm just gonna bring the milk to a simmer. And this is gonna be the base of our pasta, of our sauce. So what it is, and there's so many different types of recipes with different types of cheeses. We're using cheddar cheese and Gruyere cheese, which is basically, I love Gruyere. It's one of my favorite cheeses. It's this really beautiful Swiss cheese that's a little bit nutty. And then cheddar cheese is probably the world's most famous cheese. It's actually from England, and the first large-scale cheese factory in the world. The first sort of a smaller scale factory was done in Switzerland, but the large-scale cheese factory was first appeared here in the US. And cheddar cheese is yellow because it's made from cows that graze on a grass that's high in beta carotene. Unless it says turmeric or whatever, yellow number 3 in your your label, that's what it should be. It should just be that. So I'm just heating up. I'm just gonna leave this on just to heat up a little bit faster. So I'm just heating the milk, and that's gonna be what we're gonna make a bechamel sauce. So the bechamel sauce is basically a roux, which is equal parts flour and butter. And this is what's used as a thickener. And roux is something that's been around, really since the 17th century. It's the first time that we see this idea of a roux in France in a recipe. It's equal parts, again, fat and flour. I'm using butter, but oftentimes it can be lard, it could be oil. We're just using butter. So I'm just heating up my pot here, and I'm gonna melt 4 tablespoons of butter. And then to the 4 tablespoons of butter, I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of flour. So, but the first thing that I'm going to do is melt the butter. And then I'm slowly gonna add the flour and then just whisk it until it turns light brown. So this whole idea of roux comes from rouge, which is kind of reddish. So you wanna basically cook the flour. And this, we're gonna add our warm milk to this and then just whisk it, stir it until our warm milk is really nice and thick. So we'll know when it's ready because we're going to take our stirring spoon and run our finger through it, and it's going to leave a perfect, line. So this is our bechamel sauce that we're making. So I'm just going to heat this up. How's everybody doing? Does anybody have any questions? Is everyone good? Okay. So I'm going to lower my heat to medium and just make sure my warm. Okay. So I'm just going to whisk in my butter. Let me put this over here so you can see what I'm doing. And oh, the butter's already starting to smell. Okay. So I'm just going to whisk this in. The bottom of my pot is kind of brown, but you will still be able to tell when it changes color. So again, this is called a roux. Again, it's a thickener. But when we add milk to it, is the bechamel sauce, which is really the base of a lot of French sauces. It's just a white creamy sauce. Let me know if you have any questions. Or about this, or about the little bit of the history, or if you want to share a comforting dish that you love, I would love to hear it.
Oh, Maite, we did have some other submissions for favorite comfort foods earlier. We had grilled cheese sandwich.
Oof.
And we also had sopas, a Filipino chicken soup.
Oh, yum. What's in the Filipino chicken soup? I'm curious.
Let's see. That's from Riz and Rowan. Do you guys want to share? You could unmute yourselves.
I'd love to hear about the Filipino chicken soup. If you feel comfortable.
Oops. The secret ingredient is half and half in the sopas.
Oh, wow, with half and half. So it's a creamy soup. Super creamy soup. That sounds amazing. I want some of that.
And we have a question from Lola. How do you feel about Mexican mac and cheese fusion recipes?
Oh, well, let me think about that for a second. I'm a bit of a purist. I mean, I love all sorts of experimentation of different recipes, and that's what creates fusion food. I mean, even Mexican food is like the ultimate fusion food, which is such a blend of different ingredients. I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to mac and cheese. Like sometimes I'll go to a restaurant and there'll be like truffled mac and cheese. I don't want truffles in my mac and cheese, right? I just want, I'm a bit of a purist. So, but sometimes I put a little bit of cayenne pepper in my mac and cheese. But I'm not like, what, Lola, specifically? Is there any like flavor of mac and cheese, like with poblano or something like that?
I've seen some where they talk about chipotle mac and cheese or recipes like that, and kind of how they have to. One chef in particular talked about how when she was on the Food Network, instead of making dishes that she felt were true to where she was from, they had her creating these fusions to make people more comfortable, like chipotle mac and cheese, so that she would be more accepted mainstream.
Whatever works, right? I think if that's going to be part of your story, then yeah, why not? Personally, I like the sort of more plain, kind of comforting. But I think I think that's the story of food history, really. Like everything changes, and it's like you want to make something, kind of assimilate in a way, but also make it your own. And if that's the way to do it, that's great. I mean, that's really what chili is, right? In Texas, chile con carne. It's basically that. It's a blend of, Tex and Mex, and I've never had. I mean, it's probably delicious. So I'm all for really experimenting. If I don't know if I would order that if I was in a restaurant though. Just like I wouldn't order truffle mac and cheese.
And it looks like Elizabeth has a question. Elizabeth, you could unmute yourself if you want.
Okay, thank you. Do you know, is it possible to make a roux sauce using gluten-free flour?
That's a good question. I've never tried. I'm not too familiar with gluten-free flour, but I have heard that the brand Cup for Cup, cup the number, cup and then the letter 4 cup, and also King Arthur's flour gluten-free version are both really great substitutes. So it's probably fine. I would start with one of those two brands. I would maybe go with the King Arthur one, which I've heard really great things about first, and try that because it's supposed to be a good, like the good substitute. I have to say I've never tried it though, so I don't know for sure.
Thank you.
Sorry, I wish I could say yes, but I can't imagine that. I think it probably would work.
So is Rebecca going to be okay if the Feldmans get
Hi, I wanted to ask a question. Are you putting the roux in the milk now, or the milk in the roux?
My milk is still heating up.
Okay.
Yeah, my milk is still heating up. My burners are a little bit slow. My milk is still heating. And I'm just going to bring it to a simmer, and then I'm going to add it to my roux.
Okay.
To create my bechamel sauce. So let me just switch the camera over so you can see that it's starting to turn brown, and I can smell it. It smells a little bit like when you're baking cookies. It has that sort of caramelized smell. So I can smell that already. I'm going to put this lid just on my milk just to heat that up a little bit. So I'm just going to flip this over so that you could see. I don't know if you can tell from where I started, but it's a little bit darker brown. Don't look at the bottom of the pot, which is very dark brown, but you can see that it's a little bit darker brown. And again, it should smell nice and just nutty. How's it going, everybody? Yeah, okay. So as soon as this starts to simmer, I'm going to remove the bay leaf and then add the milk to it. And this is going to take a little bit of time to stir until it comes to a boil and it really starts to thicken. So again, this is the bechamel sauce that also goes back, to France. There's a very famous chef named Antonin Carême, and he invented all sorts of incredible pastries. He's basically the first, celebrity chef. And he has a great quote. He has so many great quotes. He talks about roux. Roux is as indispensable to cooks as ink is to writers. But just as a scribe cannot produce a masterpiece simply by dipping his pen into black liquid, a sauce is not necessarily improved if the roux has not been simmered with sufficient care. So you just kind of have to be a little bit careful. I love that. I love that quote. So my roux is nice and nutty brown, and it looks like my milk is almost there. Yeah, it's nice and warm. I'm just going to remove the little bay leaf, and then I'm going to start pouring it in there, and just whisking it. So I could see it's already starting to come to a simmer. And I'm going to add my milk. And then just start stirring. So this is 4 cups of milk. A little bit less because I used some in my coffee this morning. All right. So let me just put all of this in there. And then I'm just going to start whisking away. So I'm just going to whisk until it really starts to thicken, till it comes to a boil, really starts to thicken. And then I'm going to use my spoon to just make sure that it coats the back of the spoon. So this is going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a little bit of time to get there. But does anybody have any questions? How's it going, Rowan? Riz and Rowan, how's the cooking going? Good. Let's see who else is cooking. Amanda and Jackie, all good? Lola, are you making the mac and cheese? No.
Should we start the pasta?
I have my pasta water going. Yeah, so yeah, as soon as your pasta pasta water comes to a boil. So I have my water pretty generously salted.
Okay.
I'm heating that up. So as soon as that comes to a boil, I'm going to put my pasta in there. And also should have cooked the pasta according to your package direction. My package says 6 minutes. If you're doing the baked version, cook it 1 minute less. So because we don't want to cook it all the way to al dente, we want to cook it a little bit less because it's going to go in the oven. So you don't want to.
In the oven, how long do you bake it?
If you're gonna cook it in the oven, so don't cook it till al dente. So whatever your package direction says, do a minute less.
And then if you put it in the oven, how long?
Yeah, do a minute less cooking on the stove top, and then save about half a cup of cheese to sprinkle on top, and then put it in the oven for what did I write down? For 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, so put it in the oven for 15 minutes. So my pasta, you can see that it's really starting to thicken. It goes pretty quick, and you just want to make sure that you whisk, that you don't have any lumps, any of the floury lumps. Our flour is cooked really, really well. If it was nice and golden brown, it was cooked really well. So just bring it to a boil and just keep cooking. You want a nice and thick sauce. So let me just flip this over to show you what I'm looking at. Okay, so you see how thick it is already, and that's just the flour. So when I say that it's thick enough to cook the back of the spoon, you notice my finger, if I put my finger across like this, you see how the line just stays, it doesn't drip into itself. That's when we know it's ready. So that's definitely coats the back of the spoon. So that's ready. And now what I'm going to do is cup by cup, I'm going to add the milk. So I can hear my pasta boiling, or almost come to a boil. So I'm actually I'm going to add this. So I'm going to put my Gruyere first. So I have about a cup and a half of grated Gruyere. So I'm going to put a little bit at a time, and then just mix that in well until it's really nice. Everything is just nice and melted. So it's a really, really smooth sauce. And the pasta, some of the recipes instruct, to boil the pasta for hours. Like it must have been either super mushy or just really, really, really hard pasta. I think it's so interesting that the earliest pasta factories were started in the US by French. And then once we started seeing a lot of Italian immigrants in the US, Then it just kind of, this particular, macaroni and cheese became quite popular because the Italian immigrants were basically making macaroni or pasta with tomato sauce and meat. So spaghetti and meatballs, I think it's one of the early comfort foods that somebody mentioned. So this kind of became the American way to do it. And then of course there's cacio e pepe, which is probably my favorite Italian pasta. That's just cheese and pepper, literally, which is delicious. So that was the 1.5 cups of Gruyere, and now I'm adding about 3 cups of cheddar cheese. And this is going to turn it yellow. Not as yellow, oh sorry, I flipped this over. Not as yellow as the Kraft macaroni and cheese, but more yellow than what I had.
So is your heat still medium or low?
My heat right now is on medium. Yeah, I have my heat on medium still. And I'm just, making sure that everything melts before adding the next handful of cheese. Oof, this looks so good. It's like, it looks like Christmas. Not that I ever have mac and cheese at Christmas, but it just feels so hearty, delicious. Okay, so my pasta water has come to a boil. And I'm going to add my pasta while I finish melting my cheese. So my pasta calls for 6 minutes, and it's very salted pasta water. I'm going to do 6 minutes. And then I'm going to go in just occasionally just to stir it. For some reason, the elbow noodle pasta instructions always say to do that. So I'm going to cook this for just 6 minutes. And how's everyone? Whoops. How's everyone doing? Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything? Is everyone doing okay?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
This looks so much better than any version of mac and cheese I've ever made. But when I've made homemade mac and cheese, once it dries or once I refrigerate it, the cheese gets really hard. And I was just wondering if you have any ideas of on why that might happen.
Why it gets hard? Huh.
It just turns into kind of like a hard, just a layer of hard cheese on it, which doesn't look appetizing at all after once it cools.
Yeah, well, so what about like when you reheat it, doesn't it melt again, or does it leave that, or does it just not taste as good?
It's just, yeah, it's never as good once it's reheated.
It's never as good. I'm not really sure why.
But I've never gone through this whole process, which looks like it's a much better process than what I've done.
Okay, how have you done it?
Just with a little bit of milk and butter, and then I melt the cheese. Maybe it needs a little bit more milk from what I'm seeing, and this process of whisking it, because I just kind of melt the cheese with a little bit of milk and a lot more cheese.
Yeah, there are some recipes. This is a lot of milk, but this is a really like super creamy mac and cheese. So maybe that's what, did you start with a roux? Like, did you do the bechamel? That might be it too, because the bechamel makes everything just very creamy and just I mean, it's weird to say it's all of this milk and all of this cheese and butter. It's like, but it feels lighter than, if it's just the cheese or something about it that just feels just a little bit more, just creamy, and that might help. Yeah, it might help.
Also, hi Maite. So my daughter doesn't like Dijon mustard, so I'm a little ahead of the class. So I took a portion and I didn't do it with the Dijon mustard, but I'm using reduced fat cheeses and non-fat milk, and it's delicious that way too. It's really, I don't know if you can't see. It's really creamy too. So
really creamy. Okay, good.
So just FYI, you can do it like with light and reduced, and which is how I did it. So
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So this is this is like this really. Let me just take. I forgot to ask the. I'm trying to figure out my time because I didn't set the time. So 3 minutes. So Karen, you mentioned mustard. So yeah, I'm adding right now that I have all of my cheese in, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of mustard, and it's not mustardy. It doesn't make it taste mustardy. It's almost like what lemon does to a sauce, gives it that little acid. So just gives it a little extra, oomph. It's not, it doesn't make it, taste mustardy at all. It just gives it a little something, just a little something extra. So I'm gonna whisk that in. I'm gonna add, the cheese has, there's some salt in here, and also the cheese has a little bit of salt. But I'm still gonna add about half a teaspoon of salt, kosher salt, just to start. And about half a teaspoon of white pepper. I like to use white pepper in this. You don't have to, you could use regular black pepper. I just like that it disappears and then it's just the color of the cheese. So I'm gonna add also about half a teaspoon of black pepper, of white pepper, it just gives the flavor. This is where sometimes I've added a little bit of cayenne just to give it a little extra something. And I'm going to add just a little bit, grate a little bit of nutmeg. I have a fresh little nutmeg here. You could add just a pinch of nutmeg. And also this just gives it another dimension, which I think is really nice. Just a little bit, because nutmeg can be a little bit overpowering. So, oh, it smells amazing. So just grab a spoon. Just to taste, I'm gonna lower my heat now while I wait for my noodles to cook and just taste it for seasoning. Oh my God, that's really good. I'm gonna add a little bit more salt. I'm gonna add another half a teaspoon of salt and the rest of this pepper and just a little bit more nutmeg. And that's it. And then just whisk that and just wait for my noodles to be ready. There are a lot of letters, I mentioned the party at Thomas Jefferson's at the White House. But there are letters of, where he would buy his macaroni. There was a place in Trenton, New Jersey, where he would buy it and they would sell it a pound for 19 cents. So how many pounds did he would buy? Like 20 pounds of noodles for particular parties. So there's certain shops that sold imported foods. So noodles or macaroni from Meatballs and French truffles. And so it's kind of interesting to see what they were importing from Europe. That's so good. Okay. I think my noodles are ready. Let me just give them a stir and then just strain them. And I'm gonna just pour them directly into my, the cheese sauce. Oh yeah, that's perfect. So if you look over, let me flip it over. It's certainly not as yellow as the macaroni and cheese. It's a very pale yellow. So I'm going to just strain this and bring it right back. Okay, so I have my pound of noodles. I'm gonna just pour them in here. And then just mix them. So you'll see what I'm talking about, that they're very, it's very thick. sorry, not very thick. It's very much it's very loose. So if I were to put this in a baking dish and put it in the oven for 15 minutes at 325, I would be able to then cut this in pieces, in squares. This is completely a personal choice. I really tend to like it just like this, a little bit more soupy. But the more, if I, when I reheat this, tomorrow, it will become, much denser. But it is a pretty thick sauce. So it's a lot of sauce. It's certainly, if this is too cheesy for you, you could cut down on milk. But if you did it, I'm gonna put some in my, so it's a very loose macaroni and cheese. Look at that, delicious.
Oh, Jackie, did you have a question? You could unmute.
Maite, can we freeze this? I know it's a weird question.
Boy, I don't know if I would freeze the noodles. I don't know how well it would do. I've never tried freezing pasta.
After cooked, yeah.
Yeah, after cooked, I've never tried. Lola, do you have you ever frozen? No. Yeah. Maybe give it to neighbors. If you have neighbors, yeah, I would, yeah, maybe either save some for tomorrow, give some to friends, neighbors, families. Yeah, I don't know if I would freeze noodles. I'm a fan of I'm a huge fan of freezing. I think it's a wonderful invention, but noodles, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Has anybody finished and tasted their pasta, their noodles?
Well, I had a question too.
Yes.
For the oven, are you saying 15 minutes, 15 or 50 minutes?
15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes. And also, yeah, if you have a little extra cheese, and I don't know if I said this at the beginning, just sprinkle a little extra cheese on top or save some. If you already put it all in, don't worry about it. If you didn't put it all in the sauce, just put a little bit on top. If you just happen to have breadcrumbs, like panko breadcrumbs, you could put some of those on top or some Parmesan cheese on top if you'd like a crispy topping. But yeah. So
and you don't cover it with foil or anything. You just, okay.
Yeah, just cover it and you'll get like a nice golden brown, top in about 15 minutes. But yeah, you could add a little bit more. If you put that extra cheese on top, it'll give it a kind of golden just color to it.
Okay.
Has anybody else? I have to taste this.
So good.
This is dinner. So good. It's so good. Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's so interesting that this was considered just, during World War II, like this was the meat, like this was a good substitute for meat because of the cheese.
And I see, Lola, you had a question about upcoming classes. Was that for Maite specifically or for the One Story programs?
Actually, both would be great.
Okay, I'll let you go first, Maite, if you have some programs coming up.
I'm doing another collaboration with Lehigh University Art Galleries on Thursday, and that's a museum. It's a museum that's associated with Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, and we're doing a series with local restaurants. So Thursday, I'm doing one with a restaurant that's a local restaurant in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That's a restaurant, an art gallery, and a mental health center. So we're doing a program together, and that's on this Thursday, and it's free for anybody, families. So that's what's coming up there. I have another program with them coming up next. I can't remember the date of that one. That's going to be in Spanish, and it's going to be about Japanese art and food history. So that's coming up. I have something with Literary Affairs, a book club. On this book that just came out called The Committed, that's about Vietnam. So it's going to be a book discussion, cooking class, and then I have a bunch of more things that I will post soon. But thanks for asking. Everything's on my website. I'll put my website on the chat if anybody wants to look and see what's coming up.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'll send it
Oh, I
over.
sent it to you.
It's okay. I have access to everyone. I will send that over. And
Okay.
then as far as One Story, One City, we do have more programs on our website. So I'll put a link for you there. This Saturday, we do have our editor talk. So the book Eat Joy that we've been promoting has all these assorted stories from different authors. And the editor will be with us. Her name is Natalie Eve Garrett. So that'll be 2 p.m. on Saturday. We also do have a virtual play that you can attend on Friday at 7 p.m. So look out for that. And if you have been participating in our kit giveaways, every Tuesday we do have kits for all ages available at all 3 of our branches. So there is one kit remaining for One Story, One City, and that is your own little herb garden. So be sure to stop by next Tuesday to pick that up. They do go quickly and we start giving them out at 10 a.m. And then, of course, I did put in the information there for our digital community cookbook. So be sure to contribute any recipe you'd like to that, and you'll be entered in a drawing for the gift baskets.
Does anybody want to share their finished product? Or anybody have any other, final thoughts or questions? Oh, Karen, that looks beautiful. Let's see, Ruth and Rowan, that looks amazing. Are you gonna, wow, that looks beautiful. Good job. Are you gonna bake that or are you just gonna leave it as is?
I think we're gonna bake.
You're gonna bake it? Okay.
Yeah. Should we set it to, should it be at 350 for 15 minutes or should it be higher?
You could just do 325. It doesn't have to be that
325.
high. Yeah,
Okay.
325 because the noodles are almost completely cooked. Hi. So yeah, just 325 for 15 minutes is great.
We'll do that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm doing half of each. I made a small that I'm baking and we're gonna eat the one in the pot.
Oh, great. So let me know which one was the winner. Or maybe they both are, just a little bit different. Well, thank you all so much. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great evening.
And before we go, Maite, I see someone, Anita is asking if you can send updates do you have like an email mailing list that you could send updates about your programming?
I do actually. If you go to my website, there's a section there to sign up for the mailing list, or I can be emailed directly and I could put you on that list as well.
Okay.
So my email is I can put my email up here,
and I'll share it with
and
everyone.
You can share it.
Okay.
That's great. So you could either.
Thank you so much, Maite.
Thank you. Great to see you. Thank you all so much. Have a great dinner. Have a great comforting dinner. Have a good night, everybody.